Excerpt of the report filed by Colonel Mariëtte Wijnkoop, Officer of Bureau Aegis to O12 Security Council in a closed session. Required clearance code Alpha. Cerberus' fall and the race towards Consillium Prima. We gave our best. Some of us gave all they had. Diomedes, Patroclus, so many other anonymous heroes laid their lives to hold the forward line of the second wave. They bought us time to organise, and we managed to fight them on equal footing. We suffered losses, but we also inflicted some, and I'm confident we saved countless lives that day. What was it all for, though? All we managed to do was give Consilium a brief respite, and it was over the moment the Extra arrived with the third wave on their tail. Their ships crossed the Cerberus wormhole like a vicious plague of locusts. Most of the ships that managed to cross did so at the cost of most of their crew, but they couldn't care less. All they needed was a pilot to fly and a gunner to cause as much damage as they could before being destroyed by our ever-dwindling defences. Following them was the true might of the combined army's fleet. The clash was brutal. Having arrived as reinforcements, the crew members of the still phalanxed ships honoured their reputation and fought tirelessly, resisting past the line where the usual complement of the Cerberus blockade and the Wolfsegen defence line had been reduced to atoms in the void of space. Yet not even they could halt the inevitable. They were finally overrun, and the SPS Lampos, Hector's flagship and sole survivor of the fleet, was left adrift, crippled, and with a massive hull breach. Thus, the aliens gained free access to the inner system. Until they reached the Cert monitor system, that is. Never in history had artillery batteries been more necessary. Never in history had defensive positions been so effective. The state-of-the-art military technology they were hiding wreaked havoc, but it wasn't enough. The combined fleet didn't lag behind, and this time around they managed to squeeze several alien capital ships through Cerberus, all armed to the teeth with planetary siege weapons. The power of their artillery and their overwhelming numbers swept across the armed ring of the Certo monitor system, leaving it in ruins, with some sections being so thoroughly destroyed that it looks like they have never been there in the first place. We used Niflheim as a trap again, drawing their ships into the raging gas giant's gravitational well due to the vicious and erratic EM fields that surround it, but it did little good against such vast numbers. Most of the combined fleet kept creeping towards the inner system, and we lost all the Kabakaki Corsair ships we sent as bait. Those ships included some of the best freelance pilots in the sphere, capable of riding solar flares and manoeuvring through a tidal wave of missiles. The numbers were against them. Likewise, the ambush we sent from the Brisingamen asteroid belt yielded poor results. The nomad military forces and the Starmada ships hidden within the labyrinth of rocks fell like screaming eagles upon the alien fleet, attacking swiftly and returning to the safety of the asteroid ring just as fast. Corregidor didn't forget, and though they celebrated a small victory for each large vessel taken down, they didn't manage to slow down their march on Consillium Prima. The joint attack by Starmada's Space Coma squad and Bakunin's sophisticated Fatal Fury automatic torpedo ships failed to cause any significant damage against the Morat capital ship known as Ultrox Hammer, and though it wasn't entirely unaffected, it was able to continue its relentless journey to the planet. All that was left in its wake was debris, bodies, and escape pods, broadcasting desperate SOS signals on all frequencies. Consillium Prima's orbit was the last bastion of defense before the alien forces descended upon the planet. The main goals of the defenders were preventing the enemy from landing their space-to-ground transport ships, so they couldn't reinforce their troopers on the battlefield, and keeping orbital supremacy, which would have meant a complete reversal of the scales. As secondary goals, they were tasked with protecting Consilium Nova's orbital rings, which were full of innocent civilians, and the space elevators, whose destruction would lead to a catastrophe when the elevators' cables and infrastructure came crashing to the ground. Luckily, the aliens were too focused on reaching the planet's surface, and they practically ignored both the elevators and Consilium Nova, save for a series of precision strikes on the orbital ring's batteries, which were obliterated. Most of the damage the dual complex endured was caused by the shower of floating wreckage left by the surrounding space battle. The number of people who died and were MIA on Consillium Nova was already considerable at that point, but it would pale in comparison to what would come next. The battle for Consillium Prima's orbit was as brutal as it was savage. Our forces knew what was at stake. They knew every alien they killed up there was a life saying down on the planet. But the combined army troopers were also aware of the almost indisputable fact that if they managed to land, they could force an endgame, and they could almost feel the sweet taste of victory on their lips. Actions were as bold as they were unexpected, and they happened back and forth. The embattled Raven Eye complex suffered a frontal assault that routed the troops of the resisting Consilium Coordinated Command. After a vicious fight, the Morat asserted their dominance over the platform. However, part of the defending forces were evacuated, but not before a Cosmoflot sabotage team managed to render the complex's weapon systems completely useless. Sadly, the Neo-Dolphin that piloted the rescue shuttle would die due to the wounds suffered by a haphazard impact, and was posthumously decorated by the three superpowers involved in that front. The Shasvasti Expeditionary Fleet stealth frigate known as Davaresh, one of the species' flagships during this attack, would fall like a hawk against an unarmed transport ship coming from Consillium Prima's moon of Reconto as it reached for the planet. What seemed like a routine operation became a nightmare for the aliens, and they sprang the trap laid by the State Empire's army. The transport was filled with the best Yu Jingyu landing troopers and experts in close quarters battle. Tiangao and Suliong acted in unison, leading a motley crew of martial artists and armoured troopers that raised the frigate deck by deck with such ferocity that not all of them managed to abandon the ship in time before it exploded. Starmada and the Consilium Planetary Defence Force, CPDF, deployed everything they had on the planetary orbit and managed to take down some important targets. But they were inevitably overwhelmed, and a trickle of alien vessels started to descend upon Helheim and Dagama. Nevertheless, some of those ships actually descended out of control, spiralling down until they became nothing but fireballs as they hit the ground. Taking control of Project Shimmering Sky, Bureau Aegis activated a hidden setting in the nanobot cloud that covers Consilium Prima's sky to clean the atmosphere of the noxious volcanic gases coming from the Chula region. The nanobots turned hostile towards any alien ship that crossed the cloud, affecting their navigation and manoeuvring systems. Many ships were taken down with this ploy, but they were only those lighter and less armoured. Since it wasn't military-grade technology, Shimmering Sky couldn't penetrate the hull of the mid-sized and heavy ships, which ended up reaching the planet's surface mostly unchallenged. At this point, it's worth noting the courage and leadership skills displayed by Saladin, who coordinated the defensive actions of Starmada and the Capikalki ships from the very orbit until his own vessel was taken down near the coast of Minas Gerais, from where he'd be rescued. Since the main goal of the combined army was to set up ground operations at that stage of the offensive, the alien ships focused on breaching our defensive lines and landing on the planet before they managed to consolidate the positions they'd gained in orbit. This allowed us to avoid a scenario in which they attained complete orbital supremacy and provided us with some breathing space for our defensive operations, which, in turn, would help us prevent further loss of life, despite the fact that it had helped little in the long run. Once the combined army fleet managed to set foot on Dogama, the endgame situation they craved was closer than ever.